Well, welcome again to another edition of Beginner's Corner. I'm sitting here with a good friend, Jim Haxby. Jim is one of the most knowledgeable people I know in stamps and paper money and coin money and every other thing, and he's a delight to speak with. So welcome, Jim. Nice to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
Let me ask you the question I ask everyone. What brought you to stamp collecting? How old were you?
I was 5 when I started collecting stamps, which makes it 77 years ago. And I don't quite remember why I started collecting stamps. I believe that there is what might be called a collector gene, and people can have more than one set of a given gene, and I think I probably had about 4 sets. And so I started collecting just naturally, and I did the same with coins 4 years later. So it just starts, and it's amazing how people who have the gene collect, and people who don't have the gene not only don't collect, but they don't understand what motivates people to collect.
Let me go a little bit deeper into this, because one of the things that we always speak about is in stamp collecting is there are so many variations of collecting. I mean, some people collect only United States stamps, some people collect only European, some people collect worldwide, so forth. But I think you have one of the most interesting specialties, and that's airmail. What brought you to airmail, and what's special about airmail stamps?
What interested me about airmail was related to the fact that I love airplanes and flying. Unfortunately, my vision did not allow me to become a pilot because I wear glasses and have since I was very young, but I've always loved airplanes. And so my stamp collecting was a natural for me to move over into airmail, because airmail is carried by airplanes, and along with that is the development of aviation and aircraft. Part of the progress in aviation and aircraft is related to carrying the airmail, making planes specifically to carry the airmail in the early days.
Talk a little bit more, and one of the things that fascinated me about returning to stamp collecting was I realized the historical significance and the historical beauty of stamps for forever. Talk a little bit about what it is to collect airmail stamps and what you look for specifically and historically.
The history portion is very important, and airmail stamps tell a story of the development of aviation. They also are important not only for themselves, but also when they are still affixed to envelopes, that is to say, when they're on cover. Because in many of the great milestones of aviation, covers, special souvenir covers were created that were carried on the particular flight. For example, Admiral Byrd in 1927 flew across the ocean to Paris, and Lindbergh did too, of course, but Byrd was in that contest, and on his flight, he carried special souvenir covers. So it's not just the stamps that are historical, it's when the stamps are associated with a particular flown cover. That also is very much the case with the German airships, the dirigibles. They made a great effort to interest collectors in collecting these souvenir covers of the various flights, and so many of those were created, and there is great collector interest in those.
What's the first airmail stamp ever issued in the United States?
The first airmail stamps, there was a set of 3, were issued in 1918. They were issued, at that time, the government ran the airmail service. Army planes were used. Those aircraft were left over from World War I, and they were modified for carrying mail. And there was a set of 3 stamps issued, different denominations, 8, 16, and 24 cent. The reason for those different denominations was depending on how far the airmail letter was to be flown. Zones were set up, and if it was flown in the first zone, it was 8 cents. Flown to the second zone, it was 16, and so on. And there's an interesting story associated with that, because the 24 cent stamp in that series was a bicolored stamp, blue and red, and the Jenny airplane pictured on that stamp, on some of the stamps, was printed upside down, and that created a very famous variety where the plane is flying upside down. And one sheet of those was produced and actually issued to the post office and sold to a collector who profited very much from that. So those stamps are $1 million stamps now.
Wow. So you could literally trace the history of aviation just through the stamps issued all along the way. True? False?
Yes, many of the milestones are commemorated on the stamps, or are seen with a combination of the stamp and the cover. For example, that flight to Europe that I talked about, that Byrd made, Admiral Byrd, there was no specific stamp produced for that, but there was a regular stamp on the cover, so that marked the event.
As a beginner, if I decide I would like to collect airmail stamps, what's my best way of going about it?
Well, the whole world issues airmail stamps, and one of the things that you would have to decide as a beginner is which countries you want to collect. Some people collect thematically. They could collect airmail stamps or space stamps, and if you collect, for example, just United States stamps, there's a limitation on the number of stamps that would be available. If you collect the whole world, it's much broader, and you could collect your whole life and still not get all the airmail stamps. So you have to decide the scope of what you want to collect. And by the way, thematic collecting is very popular. People collect a myriad of things. For example, some people collect chickens on stamps, dinosaurs on stamps, mushrooms on stamps,
Pianos on stamps,
and art on stamps. And various countries take advantage of those interests and issue special sets to cater to the thematic collectors.
Let me ask you this. As a beginner, would airmail stamps be a good, and let's speak just United States, would airmail stamps be a good beginning for someone? Would commemoratives be a good beginning? I know it depends on your personal likes and dislikes, but what would you suggest if I came into you and said, Jim, I want to start collecting stamps. I've seen some airmail stamps. They're terrific. I'd like to start collecting them, or should I stay with the commemoratives? What would you suggest to me?
I would suggest commemoratives, because stamps are history, and that is one of the things that has kept me coming back again and again to collecting, is the aspect of history. And the commemorative stamps contain little snippets of if you're looking at just the United States, of United States history. And the airmail stamps have history too, but the regular commemorative stamps are greater in number, and they're relatively inexpensive. That's another thing that's nice for the beginning collector, is to not have to spend a great deal of money. And so I would suggest collecting commemorative stamps and following up on the history that they represent. Study what the meaning of the historical event depicted on the stamp is about. And sometimes it reveals very interesting aspects of our history.
Thank you, Jim. That's good for this particular interview, but you're not getting off that easy. Keep your hands away from those chips. We're going to bring you back at a later time because you are writing a book, and I want to talk about that book because you also collect paper money and coins and these kinds of things, all of which are phenomenally interesting. So we will have you back. Give us a little hint just now. Where's the book at? How far away are we from getting a look at it?
Well, I'm not just working on one book. I'm working on more than one, but the one that is the highest priority at the moment is it's a 3-volume work, and that's probably 6 months away.
Okay. We will keep an eye out for it, and in the meantime, go to the chips, Jim. You've done a good job.
Thank you.